Alright everybody, here's lecture 1. You'll have to forgive me, I keep looking down at my notes and I'm kind of terrible at using an iPad, so if I keep looking down and showing you the top of my head, I'm sorry about that, but I can't remember everything I want to say, so I keep having to refer to my notes. Alright, so in week 1 and week 2, we're going to start talking at a pretty basic level about the principles of communication. What is it? How does it work? How does it function? And especially what does it look like in the workplace or the business world? Now, this seems like a fairly straightforward process because we're kind of all in the business of communicating all the time. We're constantly sending messages to people and texting, tweeting, talking, using a variety of mediums to communicate with one another. But in the workplace, and especially dealing professionally with a lot of groups of different types of people and different groups of people, communication can sometimes become fairly messy, and it's often open to misinterpretation, things that could often get you into some trouble. So at a basic level, communication, as the note says, is basically just sending and receiving messages from one person to another person or a group of people. Could be spoken, could be written, could be nonverbal. Any way that you communicate with someone in any form or medium, that's communication. So the way I see it, there are 6 principles of communication. The first one is that communication is irrevocable or irrevocable, meaning it cannot be taken back once it's out there. So once you say something to someone or they read what you've written, once it's in the world and in their brain, it's kind of there, which is kind of dangerous. You kind of have to be careful about the way you talk and the way, especially that you write, and the way you have to anticipate the way that people are going to interpret what you have to say, and kind of think about your audience before you say it, because once it's in the world, especially in an electronic medium or written medium, email, tweet, Facebook post, even a snail mail letter, once it's in the world, you can't take it back. It's out there. So principle 2 is that communication is repairable. So if you mess up, you get something out there into the world that you don't necessarily like, you can repair it. So if you make a mistake in communication, you can often repair it, but you can't erase the previous impression. You might be able to change it or alter it, but that first impression that you made with your communication is still going to be there. So number 1, it's irrevocable, you can't take it back. But number 2, the good news is that communication can be repaired. Principle number 3 is that communication is both synchronous and asynchronous in our world. Synchronous would mean that you're communicating with someone at the same time. This would be like face-to-face conversations, phone conversations, video chats, things like that, where you're actually having a give and take response with someone, kind of interrupting one another, talking over one another, going back and forth, and you're able to actually hear voice intonation, be able to see the body posture, for instance, and you can actually interpret a lot more from synchronous communication. Asynchronous means that there's a delay someplace. Maybe this is like a text message situation, maybe it's like this video coming to you whenever you decide to watch it. Asynchronous communication, like email, things like that, it allows you time to think and respond, but there's not an organic give and take of information like there would be if you were having a face-to-face conversation. And there are benefits to both types. Synchronous and asynchronous are both used in their own right at specific times for specific purposes, and so we'll get into that a little bit more. Principle 4 is, and this is I think the most important one, communication is based heavily on perception and interpretation. Just because I say something to you and I know what I mean does not mean that that information is going to be conveyed to you in a way that you get or understand. And communication by definition is kind of a flawed system. That's actually principle 5. Communication is by definition faulty. So in a perfect world, everyone would know what we meant when we said it. They would understand what we wrote when they read it, and there would never be any misunderstandings. But if you are married or have a girlfriend or boyfriend, or you're in a family or you work someplace, you'll know that communication often breaks down, and there's thousands of reasons for that to happen. It could be a failure in technology, it could be a cultural difference, it could be any number of things that leads to a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation. This happens, I think, more often with asynchronous or text-based communication, the kind we're going to be doing mostly. So you have to think about how people are going to view your message before you send it. And then the last one, number 6, is that communication is nonlinear and subject to distraction, or what we call noise in the notes. Nonlinear means that if we were having a conversation, I wouldn't talk until I was finished, and then you would talk until you were finished. And it wouldn't be a very static interchange of communication. People talk over each other, they talk at the same time, they don't wait for messages to be received before they send another one. And communication, a better way to say it probably is just kind of messy. That diagram that you see in the handouts that shows the filter and the stimulus and the reception of message, that very rarely often happens. And messages are usually going both ways at the same time. They're being interpreted at a very high rate, a very fast rate. So maybe you're interpreting someone's body posture and facial expressions while they're still absorbing your message and responding. If you've ever seen an argument, you can see that there's usually more than one message happening at a time. So just a quick review, 6 principles. It's irrevocable, it's repairable, it's both synchronous and asynchronous, it's based heavily on perception and interpretation, it's by definition faulty, and it's nonlinear and subject to distraction. And like I said, those distractions can be anything. They can be internal distractions, things you're thinking about, your cultural perceptions. They could be external, loud music, trying to talk over a crowd of people. It could be a broken phone connection. It could be faulty internet connection. So there are both internal and external distractions to our communication that we have to account for before we really give it and receive it. So those 6 principles are something that I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through the course. Those are kind of the foundational elements of what we're going to be discussing. So if you read through the notes, you'll see that the communication model has basically 5 steps. There's the stimulus, the thing that makes you want to communicate. And again, that could be any number of things, but usually you have a reason, you have something to say to someone. That's the stimulus. The filter is the internal variables of both the speaker and the receiver, or the writer and the receiver. Those are the cultural differences. Those are the way we shape our thoughts. That's the way we use language. That filter is our personal effect on communication, because of course none of us are robots. We don't all communicate in the same way. We all have our own way of doing things. So that filter kind of shapes what we have to say. The message, of course, is the thing you're going to say or write. And then the medium, which is pretty important, is how you're going to say it. And you really need to think about this kind of diligently before you go out and start communicating, especially in the business world, because there are certain ways that you should convey certain messages. Calling someone in to fire them face-to-face is probably more appropriate to tell them they're terminated than posting on their Facebook wall, for instance, or sending them a text that says, hey, you don't need to come to work anymore. So the medium, it makes a difference. Should it be face-to-face? Should it be a letter? Should it be a memo? Should it be an email, text message, phone call? And the unfortunate thing, or maybe the fortunate thing about today's society and our ability to communicate technologically, is we have more mediums than ever before to choose from. We have Skype and iChat and all sorts of stuff that allows us to communicate with one another. So there's an appropriate medium and there are inappropriate mediums for whatever it is you need to say. And then the last part of that communication model is the destination, or the person you're trying to convey the message to. And like I said, these steps do not usually happen in order or with this type of neatness or clear-cutness. It's more of a kind of a hodgepodge or a jumping around where we miss steps get broken, there's noise, there's distraction, things like that. So the barriers to communication sometimes outnumber our ability to communicate, and those barriers are listed for you in the notes. There's quite a few of them. So I want you to kind of think about Chapter 1 as you're reading it, and think about maybe some real-life examples of communication you've had both at home and at work and maybe with friends and so on, where these principles seem to be at work, and maybe come up with some examples of that you can write about in the discussion board of how communication in your life has broken down, or how you've made maybe a faux pas or an error in communication. So that's basically a nice short lecture just through Chapter 1, outlining the 6 principles of communication, the communication model, and some of the barriers to our communication. There are handouts that you'll see below in the handouts folder or in the handout section that kind of give you a visual representation of these ideas, and you can also read about them in the chapter outlines. All right, so that's Lecture 1. I'll post a lecture here in just a little while about the writing process and some more information there. All right, see you then.